Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Murphy, for being here today. I just wanted to return to an issue that Deputy Fleming raised when he was talking about the membership of the board. I think that sitting on a board and sitting on a board like this is a big responsibility with that, and I think it's a lot of work, I'm sure, as well. And I think it's important that if people are going to take on that work, that in certain instances that they will be paid for that. But I think the idea that the head of one state agency would sit on the board of another and get paid, I find it outrageous, actually. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things, just for the record, in terms of the 6 members there that we have in the front of the 2011 report. Those 6 members were each paid for sitting on the board for that year, and that figure was 75,600, so roughly 12,600 per person. And the board met on 5 occasions in 2011.
The board met on 5 occasions in 2011, I think, yes, perhaps 6. 12,600
per person, yeah.
What's important to remember, Deputy, is that sitting on the board is not the only thing they do. They attend other meetings. For instance, one of them is on the audit committee, which meets 4 or 5, 6 times a year. And individual projects have steering groups, which must also have a director from the board. So, they engage in other meetings which aren't apparent there.
I'm aware that exactly, yes, that there's a board meeting and there'll be separate meetings that I have. But in relation to the board meetings themselves, where would they take place?
They take place in the Treasury building.
All 5 would have taken place in the...
All take place in the Treasury building, okay. Absolutely, yes.
Okay, no, I just wanted to be clear on that. And in relation to the current membership then, there's been changes?
There have been changes. We got 3 new members some months back, and there are 3 new members who will be appointed very shortly. We're waiting to hear back from the Minister for Finance on that. So 3 retired, or their term finished at the May board meeting, I seem to remember, and 3 more. Their term finishes at the end of this calendar year, effectively. So their last board meeting was on the 29th of November.
And they'll be paid for those services on the board?
Yeah. Yes.
No.
Yes.
And will any of them coming in be coming from another state agency?
Oh, sorry, of the new members?
Yes.
The new members coming in, well, one of them is the Secretary General of PR. One of them is, and he's obviously not been paid. One of them is the head of the 3rd level, the IT institutes. He's not being paid. Clearly, as I said earlier, myself or John Corrigan don't get any fees for that. Yeah, that's absolutely. So there's only one other who will be paid, I think, yes.
That person's not coming from a state agency?
No, from the private sector.
No, okay. Great. Thank you for the clarification. What I wanted to focus on mainly was the Poolbeg incinerator project, which is just mentioned on page 18 of your report for 2011. You're the financial advisor for the project.
Yes, we are. We have become the financial advisor for the project. And if you just give me 1 moment. Yeah.
It might be a bit too late.
55. Yeah. Yes, this is what we call a legacy project. This has been hanging around a long time. We were engaged as financial advisors some years back. And in fact, you'll probably be aware, and I think it was referred to previously, there was a value for money letter issued in 2007 from the NDFA, I think in May 2007. What I would refer you to as well, and perhaps you may not have seen this, but we wrote a detailed letter 2 years ago. John Corrigan, who's chairman of the NDFA, wrote a detailed letter setting out our role and our responsibilities in these matters. I think that was addressed to Deputy Fleming, but that was in his capacity as member of the Department of the Environment, or of the Joint Committee of the Environment. So if it would be helpful, Chairman, we will circulate a copy of that letter afterwards. We will supply that for the members, okay? But just to give you a little bit of colour on that, let me see. Yeah, the letter which I referred to was written by John Corrigan in March 2010, and it set out basically our role and how we got involved. First of all, it's a legacy project which predates. The project actually predates the NDFA's existence. So we worked within the pre-existing arrangements which were already set up by the sponsoring authority, the DCC, and the sanctioning authority, the Department of the Environment. So the arrangements included working with the client representative consortium, which had been chosen by the sponsoring agency and was led by RPS as technical advisors. The consortium also included PwC as project financial advisors and McCann Fitzgerald as project legal advisors. We issued a value for money letter, as I said, it was actually in June 2007. Now, the key role of the NDFA was to provide an opinion in relation to the value for money testing as per the guidance issued by the Department of Finance. And what we were doing was measuring what was actually tendered against what the benchmark, the agreed benchmark was. So in essence, the NDFA role of the project was to compare the net present value of the private sector bid with the MPV of the agreed public sector benchmark. In the case of this project, our role as directed by the sponsoring authority was to work with the pre-existing client representatives in order to carry out this VFM comparison. So that VFM, that value for money letter, was issued in June 2007. I have subsequently written earlier this year, in light of everything that's been happening and the various negotiations that are going on, I have written to DCC and advised them that that value for money letter is now void, and that a new value for money letter will require to be issued when outstanding commercial issues have been resolved. And there are various issues, I understand, to be resolved, including the provision of finance, private finance. I understand that discussions on the provision of private finance are well advanced. We're not privy to those discussions, obviously. But there are also a number of other outstanding issues, namely the state aid question. There's a question of state aid, which is awaiting a ruling from the European Commission. And there's also, we understand, a complaint on procurement grounds to the Commission as well, which has to be ruled upon. So only when all commercial issues have been outstanding, and those items which I've mentioned, when they have been resolved, we will then be given a new financial model. We will do a refreshed public, there will be a refreshed public sector benchmark, and the bid, the final bid received, will then be compared to test whether it's value for money.
And that's going to happen after financing has been secured on the private side?
Well, absolutely.
Once the project,
yes.
After the project's been given a kind of another go-ahead, you're then going to value for money.
Absolutely. I mean, the
Does that sequencing make sense, though?
Well, we can only assess value for money on what's finally bid. So, and that can only come to us with an agreed financial model when the other issues have been resolved.
And that includes the bid being accepted?
Absolutely, yeah.
So when this is given the green light?
I mean, the Covanta consortium is the preferred tender.
Yeah.
Okay. So if, however, the final bid that comes in does not satisfy the benchmark, well, then it won't be value for money.
So if Covanta comes in with its final bid, say in the first quarter of next year, you'll then value for money that bid. And if it doesn't represent value for money for the state, we'll finish our contract with Covanta.
Well, if it doesn't represent value for money, there's a process whereby the sanctioning authority must go to the relevant minister.
But will other people be bidding at the same time? I mean, are we asking for new bids? I mean, for example, the company Endeavour. My understanding is the preferred bidder is Covanta, and those negotiations are continuing at the moment between DCC, which is the procuring authority, and the preferred bidder. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just confused though that's because my understanding was we were just waiting for Covanta to secure final financing, and they were going to go ahead. But you're saying that that's actually in doubt now.
They are going to go ahead,
side.
but subject to it with value for money.
Okay. And when was, because I'm interested in this new value for money coming now because it's the first I've heard of it. When was that decision taken that the VFM from 2007 was void?
Basically, I, as accounting officer, am the one who has to give the value for money letter. When looking at developments and the delay, I said a letter issued in 2007 cannot be valid now. So we need to see a refreshed benchmark and a value for money test.
And when did you make that decision?
In the first quarter of this year.
First quarter of this year.
Yeah, and I wrote a letter to them in, let me see, when did I write that letter? I think it was March, was it? Yeah, March. I wrote to DCC to advise them of that fact.
Can we get a copy of that letter?
Yeah, I'm sure you can, yeah. We'll have to check, Deputy, if we legally can release it.
Okay, it would be very interesting to see. So in terms then of just 2007, the value for money letter is issued. and it says everything's okay. And a lot of things changed actually after 2007, and you've referenced some of them. But in terms of the financial advice that you give to the project, how does that work? I mean, in the first quarter of this year, you decided to look at things again, but...
Our role here was to just do the value for money test because, as I said at the start, and as explained in Mr. Corrigan's letter, this was what we call a legacy project. In other words, it predated the NDFA's formation. So our sole role as the financial advisor is to do the value for money test.
That was the sole role, so essentially in 2007 that... And when do you come back then and decide to do it again?
Yeah, the value for money test we do is that we compare the bid with the benchmark, and things have changed since. So we said the value for money letter can't be valid that we issued in March. So we've got to do a new one based on the final commercial terms, the final financial model versus a revised benchmark.
But does someone come to you and say, can you look at this again and do another VFM? I mean, in terms of...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that process is what's required under the guidelines issued by the Minister.
Okay. So did the Minister come to you then in the first one?
No. But no, the officials, the sponsoring authority, the DCC, they're following the guidelines for PPP procurement as issued by the Department of Finance or by the Department of Public Expenditure.
So they requested that you look at this again in the beginning of this year?
No, yes, but they're aware that they have to get a final value for money test before the deal can be signed.
Okay.
Okay? So they have to liaise or dialogue with us on that.
Okay.
So my colleague here, Mr. Kala, and his team, the analysts, they've been liaising extensively over the last 18 months with the DCC on exactly on this point.
Okay. So when they came to you, it was in March then that you said 2007 VFM is no longer valid. We need to look at this again.
Yes.
And
well, just for the removal of any doubt, I decided to write that letter, just so that there could be no confusion further down the road and say we thought we had value for money. Didn't want that situation to arise. I just, for the sake of clarity and certainty, I just said that now is now void.
okay.
That's the new value of money test.
And when you go to do the new test then at the beginning of next year, what will you be taking into account? I mean, will you take into account, for example, the 80 million already spent? Will you take into account things like the Hennessy report, you know, which talked about a potential future liability for the taxpayer?
There'll be a final bid, a financial model, which we will compare to the benchmark. So that whatever money is spent is irrelevant for that, because that money was spent anyway on land acquisition and on various things. Okay.
Yeah. So that doesn't come into account the fact that maybe there was a second CPO after 2007 that hadn't been anticipated in the...
The revised benchmark would take care of whatever new circumstances there are.
The money spent.
I think the money spent is excluded, because a lot of that is on land acquisition, which is going to be spent in any case.
Well, it wasn't necessarily, because the second CPO came because there was a foreshore license tonight.
Yeah. We may have to clarify that point then.
Yeah.
But the important thing is the revised benchmark will reflect new conditions, and that will be compared to the final bid.
If I may clarify,
Please.
Chairman, is any value for money assessment the test is you've to assess the value for money versus what's tendered to the market. So there's a like for like comparison, and when we are preparing a benchmark for any project, we have to make sure that it's only what's tendered to the market, what the market is going to provide, the services, the construction and delivery that it's going to provide will be incorporated into that test. So if there are enabling works in any particular project, such as land purchase or other items, they're not part of that particular test. That's a matter for the state to look after itself.
So how is that taken into account when we're looking at this in terms of being a project?
In terms of the particular value for money test that we're responsible for, it's not taken into account. That's the cost-benefit analysis that would have to be incorporated into the cost-benefit analysis.
Who does that?
That would have been done by DCC.
Dublin City Council, benefit analysis themselves. And does anyone check that for them?
I'm not aware of how that is processed.
I think we need to find that out, because someone else needs to be looking at the figures as well, rather than Dublin City Council, who are involved in the project directly and are part of the consortium. If they're doing a cost-benefit analysis, we need to know that it stands up and takes into account all the relevant things. So when you do the value for money, you won't be looking at reports like the Hennessy report that talked about a potential future. That will come into the cost-benefit analysis.
Yes.
Okay. And things like falling volumes of waste, that will come in, that's not going to come into literally you're going to look at what's been tendered in terms of how that will compare in the market.
The test we do is a very mechanical one. We can only incorporate into the public sector benchmark what the private sector is going to provide and deliver. We can't be taking ancillary costs or expenditures into account. Of course, DCC will have to incorporate all the expenditures that will arise in the project, and they do keep a full account of the total project cost.
And would it be possible in advance of you actually doing the value for money test to get, written down in correspondence the types of things, how that will be done, just so I can have it clearly in front of me, what won't be included in the work that you'll be doing?
Yes, there's actually there's good guidance issued regarding the preparation of a public sector benchmark.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry. Actually, no, I'll leave it there, Chair. Actually, thank you for answering my questions.